Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things cube with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and today I'm joined by my other two amazing hosts, and the most amazing one.
Hi, it's me, May, also known as Magic.
And it's Stu at StuMTG. Welcome to the show.
Happy Friday, happy pre-St. Patrick's Day.
Friday. Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Neither of you are wearing green.
I don't have to. I'm a ginger.
This
is the one day that I can come out into the sunshine for an entire weekend. This is my weekend. You can't take it back.
That's playing with fire for you, I think, a little bit there.
Kissed by fire, even, you might say.
Sure.
We're not here to talk about St. Patrick's Day.
We're always here to talk about St. Patrick's Day.
Well, what are we here to talk about? Because, again, special episode, I think this one is. Mm-hmm. May, this one is about you.
Wow, for me, what a treat.
It's always about you.
It's always about you, May.
That's right.
So, which cube are we talking about? Has anybody ever heard of this? What's this cube? I've never heard of it.
Fa'i?
Fa'i?
How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, we're talking about the fake cube.
Yes.
Nice.
The fake cube. Beautiful.
And you've made some updates post CubeCon because you got to suffer a little bit and enjoy a little bit of the same thing that your good friend Anthony did. The feedback from the players at a large scale type of event where CubeCon #1, I took UberBear's Artifact Cube, and I assure you it's different now than it was then just because of the gracious players and the positive feedback and
was
the information.
Was that the Kappa Cannoneer days?
It was... We'll talk about
just
those
asking.
Days. We don't talk about Kappa? Did I mention it St. Patrick's Day?
I think it was.
All right, so...
I actually got a lot of really positive feedback from CubeCon, and I was very pleasantly surprised that people actively sought me out to tell me about their experience playing my cube. And it was really nice. It felt really validating, and I'm glad that I actually got a chance to, hear what people were drafting and were wanting to do beyond just the data that came in afterwards.
It's a pretty heavily cloned cube at this point as well, right? You've got a lot of people that have gone on and taken your list and adapted it to their own preferences, play group, whatever the case may be. And that's to me, that's one of the beautiful things about Cube, right? You've got this opportunity to take someone's ideas and then run with it, make it your own, make choices and make changes that make it so suitable for your own group and your own experience that you're looking for.
Yeah, it turns out when you make a cube for less than $100, that's kind of lowish powered, it can catch the attention of a lot of people.
Crazy how that works.
Well, that's what I was going to say. When we were talking about it recently, you and I were chatting in a previous episode, you mentioned that you actually kept the price point down to encourage people to clone your cube. It's so different than the way I think sometimes, where I'm working on my cubes and I'm looking at it like, oh man, I've got this card in here, it's signed by such and such, and it's foiled out and all that. But I didn't realize this whole time I'm actually kind of shutting the door to the opportunity for people who want to test cube in my own little way, right?
Well,
but outside of proxies, right?
Yes and no. I think obviously if you're that kind of person, right? We talked about Aqua's Cube, right? That's going to be featured in the Cali Cube event that's coming up later this year. Aqua's Cube is like the most bananas cube that's maybe ever been put together.
I would agree.
Got artist signed, artist alters, Chris Rush signed, Black Lotus, like the whole 9 yards. That is not a cube that's like an entry point to cube. It's not even an entry point to vintage cube, which is like absurdly expensive. But you've now got this opportunity to not just take your own ideas and put them into the cards, but you've now got your own ability to look at art, right? Do I even care about foil? Anthony's someone whose wallet really cares about foil because it's like, hey, look at this cool card that's normally $2 and I'm going to get the foil one and it's now $35. And you multiply that by the number of cards in a cube. Well, it starts to amplify the cost pretty considerably, right? But now you've got these really, really fun and accessible environments to play with.
So before we go any further on Fey Cube Mark 148.B update, we're going to go ahead and do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. We're going to enjoy our libations of the show. And since it is the Fey Cube discussion, what are you having on this lovely day, May?
I am actually having a horchata that came from a gas station fountain machine.
Nice.
And
Fancy.
it's better than Starbucks.
They typically are.
Like,
That's not
I'm
hard.
talking
It's not
like
hard. You don't try
posted
too hard.
sticker over the soda machine, like
So they didn't burn their
custom
horchata
drink
beans.
that they decided, hey, let's just take some, rice milk and some cinnamon sticks and some sugar, and then there you go. Here's a
There you
drink.
go. Got some horchata.
Very
How about
nice.
you, Stu? You got something like horchata here too in your hands, actually.
So I actually reserved this might actually be my absolute favorite. This is the Milky Way from the Trophy Brewing Company. It's a salted caramel sweet stout. This might actually be my number one. It might be number one.
We can go to Trophy whenever May visits for the UberCube event.
We should.
That'd be pretty sweet.
We should.
And
What
I
about
am
yourself?
having,
What
in
you
the
got?
celebration of St. Patrick's Day, because that's what I'm here for, I'm having me a Guinness. How do you spell this? DRAUGHT stout. It's going to be pretty great.
We're not talking about drought versus draft again, Anthony.
go.
All right.
All
I'll
right.
get the shovel.
We're
We're putting that one to rest.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
So
Bury it in the backyard.
we're going to do the thing that we do when we have a new person come on this show, right? We have to ask some very specific questions. There's an update, and we kind of talked about you from a design perspective wanted to embrace the storybook elements. You wanted to keep this budget friendly. It's hard not to know about the Fae Cube at this point. Elves, we've got fairies, we've got goblins, we've got tree folk, we've got wolves. We've got, what am I missing here? There's so many. There's changelings. It's very typal oriented in the sense, kindred even, right?
Mhm.
What are your overarching design goals? What was your approach on this? Just go back to square one. First thoughts.
So, square one, when I was designing this cube, I really wanted to introduce kind of the classic Morningtide, Lorwyn, subtype matters things that they were trying to do, and overlap it with that natural synergy that it had with the party mechanics from Zendikar Rising. And that was kind of my initial goal, because when I was first working on the goal of this cube, I have initially had it like a bunch of the AFR cards where it had that monster manual-esque look to the showcases, and it really made that kind of paper feel. It added a lot of like visual flavor into it, but the problem was that as time moved on and it started to develop more as like an actual format into cube, then I started pushing out all those far in D&D whatnot, but kept all the party things because I really liked how they overlapped with the Lorwyn Morningtide things. It was a really nice way to kind of bridge that generational gap and make a lot of those old cards feel really good to play.
The typal stuff is really cool as well because it shows up, right? It's pretty common from a cube perspective. There's plenty of cubes out there that are very sort of on the typal side of things. But this is one of the things that I love about this is it's not just about the one type, like, hey, go and draft this type, or hey, go and draft this type. There's a lot of mechanics, there's a lot of keywords that tie a lot of this cube together that make for a very fun drafting experience. So, fun. It's that word all over again that we keep asking, and I'm going to ask you, as we've asked on a previous episode, where's the fun?
A lot of the fun actually comes from not building the subtype things, where I actually saw a lot of people going for the adventure decks and trying to build like these 3-color adventure decks to kind of control the board. The other types of decks that they were building were things like Land Up Red, where it was this concept of taking a bunch of lands with Countryside Crusher and basically trying to get this big stupid thing to turn sideways into people, and then I ended up following that as kind of an archetype. And it was fun also seeing people come up with these weird internally existing decks that I didn't really find other places. So for example, Selesnya Wolves was a big one. And it was because there used to be pretty good enchantment package that was part of the Fake Cube for a while. And that enchantment package happened to overlap very well with the wolves, just because we had Raised by Wolves, and then we had Predator's Howl and whatnot, where there were just really good wolf-generating cards that Selesnya happened to take advantage of the most because it had the most rewarding things to go wide. And over time, I was able to refine that after it was kind of put together by the players.
So,
That's cool.
CubeCon being a much larger theater, it had a lot more drafters, different drafts goals even, right? Like when we talk about the Fae Cube, where you do have typal matters, so you kind of can provide people who want to do leaning into the changeling and maybe elf ball, or they want to do goblins or whatever, but you also provide them I guess Johnny brain-minded individuals can lean into the stuff like we talked about, the party mechanics, which we've talked about on a previous episode. Mm-hmm. But when you went into this large theater of players, what was the immediate... Did you receive any feedback that made you change course or any design elements directly in this cube? Because it's a larger variety of player styles.
Yeah, so there was actually a very specific example that got mentioned a few times, and that was... Crippling Fear was a big one, where it was 2 black for a sorcery, choose a creature type, creatures that aren't of the chosen type get -3/-3. So the issue was that you had a bunch of pieces that rewarded you for kind of being not solely in one subtype, and with Party, it made it so that way you were rewarded for just kind of having a little bit of splash everywhere, and with the Changeling, it just felt really good. What ended up happening was that people felt like that they were getting punished too early because Crippling Fear would essentially punish those multi-type decks. So I went ahead and went through, jumping the script a little bit, and replaced that with Harsh Mercy, which 2 and a white instead of costing 4, but each player chooses a creature type. Destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen type, and they can't be regenerated. The regenerating part's not important. The important part is that you're not completely setting somebody back, but just by playing it.
And it's also
the Crippling Fear was such a problem is that
design,
it put somebody so far behind that they had a really hard time getting back into the game after that.
Yeah, Crippling Fear, I can see where it runs 1 of 2 lanes. Either it's one-sided board wipe, or it's a sideboard card that's a silver bullet for a certain playstyle. So it'll break a deck. Harsh Mercy kind of... It hits this with each player chooses a creature type, so it forces symmetry of some sort. And it doesn't completely wipe the board, but I can see that. It can be a mass removal spell, or it can be an individual like threat card. Obviously, they're going to keep their better threat.
Yeah, I can see it being incredibly punishing if you're playing white, as an example, right? Let's just say mono white, very specific on the creature type, and you've got an opponent that maybe has 2 or 3 or even 4. That could be particularly devastating for one player. But if you've got one player that's sort of angled towards one type and another player that's angled towards another type, then like you say, kind of symmetrical, I think it's a very fair card and a very strong card at only 3 mana, right? So even if you only get to remove like 1 of your creatures for like 2 or 3 of your opponent's creatures, that's a pretty nice swing.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun and fair change that I needed to consider afterwards, because my goal with the Fake Cube is to make sure that people feel like that they can blossom the strategy that they're drafting into to a certain degree and not feeling punished for playing the cube the way that we were doing, as we talked about in the Artifact episodes. And the important thing to note when it came to the party decks in particular is that they could drop a Changeling on turn 1, then have 1 of the 2 party members for the next 2 turns, and then on turn, 3, 4... that they play, depending on whether or not they've had a first drop party member, Nalia de Arnis. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, but she's kind of the main powerful draw to encourage people to draft into party. Where by turn 3, if you have the 2 previous turns, you're going to have 2 of your party members, the 3rd with Nalia, and then by turn 4, you're going to have your 4th party member usually. And it made it so that way they would just create such a powerful clock so early in the game that by the time Nalia hit the board, that it was something that your opponents had to deal with. And it wasn't like in an unfair degree, but what ended up happening is that if somebody else played the Crippling Fear into it, then all that kind of build up into that nice deck that you're feeling good about is just kind of gone now. So
I will give you your one piece of pushback that I have reserved for a very long time. I played against the party deck. I enjoyed watching them pull that off. There was nothing I could do to stop them from pulling that off. It was so wildfire out of control that I just lost repetitively. I never even stood a chance. But
I want to go back.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit, and I'm going to have a question that I'm going to pose to both of you. May, I'm going to start with you, and this is about that CubeCon-ish feedback that you're getting from, now you've got a huge audience, much broader audience of players that are drafting your cube outside of just maybe your typical play group, right? Your local group that you would typically draft with. Now you've got tens, if not maybe 100 plus people that have drafted your cube, potentially over the course of a 3-day tournament. So now you're getting all this feedback. How are you filtering that feedback? Because I can certainly say for myself, I have been I tend to be emotional about things, right? So I can draft a cube and be very much like yap in my mouth about how this is too strong and maybe this is too strong. Kind of learnt my lesson over a few more years of being more experienced at drafting cube and just playing Magic in general. But how do you filter that out as a cube curator? And I want to start with you, May, as far as getting the feedback from players and it's all legitimate, right? There's no illegitimate feedback. But how do you filter like that emotional feedback versus that maybe a little bit more constructive, like, someone could have drafted a deck and just got overrun, like, oh, that deck's too strong because I lost 2 games to it, versus oh, I've drafted and I'm experienced and I can give you some legitimate feedback. Like, how do you filter that?
So the first thing that I think of is how it compares to the data that I already have and the feedback that I've already gotten from other people. Because in an ideal situation, if assuming multiple people are having high emotional responses where people are like, oh, I love this deck, it felt really good to play, but then the other person's like, man, it sucks because I lost against it, then ideally then it's going to reach some amount of zero sum.
Sure.
But there are some times where it's just like a lot of people will highlight, say, Crippling Fear, and then that's like, okay, that means I have to address it. There's now enough feedback where it's just like, okay, now I understand that that's an issue. As opposed to, I'm not going to name specific examples. There were a couple times where I was approached and they were explaining kind of what was going on with the game. And then it's just like, yep, that is certainly a normal play progression.
So I have one, for example, that I did not receive like a personal feedback, which would have been I think sometimes it's about the delivery, right? It's like we've talked about before, it's the reader-writer relationship. So if someone came to you and they decided to take the time to explain to you their logic and reasoning as to why they feel like a card is out of place, etc., right? There's a time and place for this, right? Because we've talked about this before. We put a lot of time and effort as curators, right? And I'm going to give you some critical feedback as we move through your cube, but I'm going to do it in a way I'm going to choose my words intentionally careful because I realize how much time you've invested into the development of the Fey Cube as a game system, right? It's not something that you want people to, a rain of thorns to come down upon you where you got no way out, right? So in the case of
I
mine,
actually went to CubeCon expecting it. I tend to be more receptive to
I seem to, again, it's St. Patrick's Day. I'm a redhead. I draw this stuff like nobody's business, but I received some critical feedback, but I guess it was the delivery type of situation. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this person was not incorrect in their statements, but it created this earworm when they delivered it. It was specifically speaking to the card Mystic Confluence, which resided at the time within both my artifact cube. And as of today, after long thoughts and careful study,
it's gone.
It's gone. And it really ultimately came down is it took me time to process because we've talked about this on numerous occasions. It's hard to be a curator. And that sometimes can be the hang up a lot of times why people don't want to build their first cube because of the critical feedback sometimes can be hard to take.
I will say that I've learned my lesson over the last few years. Definitely giving you feedback, Anthony. We've played together for a number of years now. I've drafted all of your cubes. And originally, I can think back to times where I would have just been very emotional, very aggressive in this card sucks. Why the hell are you including this card in your cube? You got to get it out of there, without thinking like this is someone that has put time and effort and money into putting this cube together and putting an experience on the table for the players. It's not really going to be constructive for me to just come and shout and be aggressive and just kind of be a little toxic and obnoxious almost. And I don't want to say that I necessarily have that as part of my personality overall. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Maybe it's just something that I get emotional about. And Magic is something that a lot of people do get emotional about. So I had to kind of rewire my brain a little bit and say, I can't just come and say, I'm annoyed at this. I'm mad about this. I'm pissed off that I lost to this card. I have to come and say, here's why I dislike. Here's why I like. Here is my experience and why it's valid, And that's another thing. Like, why is my experience so valid as a player?
I think that's the important thing is that when you're able to explain your experience, you're able to explain that important context that curators are looking for. So a lot of the comments that I got, I was able to deduce, what that context was for their situations that they were talking about because they explained what their experience was. And because they gave me a lot of those context clues of being like, okay, is that a play pattern that I'm wanting to encourage? Great, that was what I was intending to happen. Is that not? Well, probably not. So
as we draw into the changes you've made post KubeCon, you can see where when you're a curator and you present your cube that you've designed on, as we go from mini scale to grand scale, you extend outside of your comfort zone, your play group, you are taking a certain amount of risk. But I will tell you, I will say this wholeheartedly, by me putting myself out there on my 2 forays that I've now done with KubeCon, presenting my little cubes to the world, to the cube universe, and getting feedback. And I didn't take it all well sometimes. It's just the human nature. I can't stop myself from being that way.
People are always going to have struggle.
We're going to be people
with criticism.
But I will tell you that the cubes now are more refined until we go to 2024, but they're better than they were in 2022 and 2023. So I would love to see the KubeCon go through it. We'll call it the proverbial KubeCon meat grinder of all the players getting to give that feedback, because what I've seen, what we're about to talk about, you've made some very acute choices, little micro tweaks here and there, because people did a good job of communicating what they felt would make this cube better, right? It's going to be amazing, which we're going to kind of move into that. I want to talk about this first. We're going into your changes now. You cool with that, May, before we progress?
Yep.
We're going to have a little bit of banter here back and forth, because I do have a little bit of feedback, but I will deliver it in a way that I think I can
hit me with it.
I think I can do this. So we're going to start out with the removing the draft matters. I'm going to give you my personal opinion on draft matters. You cut this from the fake cube. I have thought about this throughout the entire day. So you put in here, this was a hard decision. It was hard. Tell me about how difficult that was.
I'm a big advocate for the Draft Matters package. I love a lot of those conspiracy Draft Matters cards. But the problem is that I was left to kind of stew and digest after KubeCon for a bit of how they actually impact the draft environment and how, I guess, competitive that they can make it, or how much additional complexity adds to the draft, etc. But at the end of the day, the main reason that I cut them was because I just needed slots for real cards. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much fun, versatility, and good feedback I got from those Draft Matters cards, it was also just a case of I needed real cards there.
So you were getting feedback about these cards. I want to quickly ask, was it a positive or a negative that the players were telling you about these cards?
Neutral.
Neutral? Okay, interesting.
I got a lot of neutral feedback on it.
So if I were a drafter, and I have drafted this cube, this is going to be against the populace opinion that I've seen. The vast majority of players that I interact with enjoy the Draft Matters card. Me as a person, me as an individual, I do not. I reserve my complexity for the playing field. I want my draft to be, in my opinion, when I'm building a deck from a very limited draft style, I don't want to add more bumps in the road. It's already hard enough to form a deck from a pile of cards, right? Adding in stuff that kind of throws in different, I guess, changes about how, and we're going to talk about this, like Cogwork Librarian.
I was going to talk about this card.
Read this card real quick.
Because, and there's a reason why I like this card so much, right? So Cogwork Librarian, it's a 4 colorless artifact creature construct. It's a 3/3. You draft it face up. As you draft a card, you may draft an additional card from that booster pack. If you do, put Cogwork Librarian into that booster pack. Why I love this card. Number one, the dynamic that it adds to the draft. Number two, the additional choice that you get if you're drafting an archetype. And I will say I've had this experience where I've literally opened a pack and I've had Cogwork Librarian in front of me and I've thought, I desperately need these 2 cards for the deck that I'm building. I am very happy to put this card in there. And number 3, if I draft this card and I don't see a second card, I've now got a 3/3 for just 4 colorless. Fits in any deck. Pretty strong.
I, as a drafter, see the value in it, but I think it detracts from the actual draft. That is Anthony's opinion solely, but I don't want to throw curveballs in the middle of a draft when I'm trying to form a deck in the middle of a limited pile already that's getting passed.
So you're a net negative.
I am not in love with this idea.
Okay.
Unless I designed a cube.
Ultimately, why I cut it is because I agree with both of you. Because at the end of the day, I agree with Stu that it does make the draft feel a lot smoother. It fixes a lot of problems. It can make it so that way you have a lot more options to fill out your archetype, and it feels really good when you get that going. However, on the other hand, it does add that extra complexity, and it adds a lot of other problems that make it less accessible for new players as well, because it just adds an additional speed bump. It just adds an additional obstacle into the drafting section. And when you're cubing with people who have an idea of what they're doing, then Cogwork Librarian feels great. Everybody knows what they're doing. Then it can be put back in. People are going to be able to take out 2 out, and then hopefully nothing wrong happens. But the problem is that it's never that smooth. And
can I ask this? Was this originally put in just purely for the mechanic, right? Because obviously it's a fun kind of thing that you get to do when you're drafting the cube. Or was it put in because you felt that you needed to give players the ability to be able to draft 2 cards from a pack because some of the archetypes depended on multiple cards that may just end up in the same booster, and that reliance is just going to kind of be broken if they don't have that ability?
And before you answer that, for the audience participation, Cogwork Librarian is the one we're kind of focusing on here, but it's also Deal Broker in this conversation. It's Leovold's Operative and Agent of Acquisition.
So 4 cards, that's not insignificant in a cube, right? So again, like, was it for that? Was it for that I need to give players that option, or was it focused? So it was that, okay.
And as my archetypes have developed and they've become dense enough that they're able to exist without having the specific pieces, more and more it's just became a kind of redundant piece in the cube that, while I do think improved the draft, it didn't really improve the cube, if that makes sense.
It does. And I understand, and I'll be very sure that Anthony will agree with me, the equity, the slots, equity. Yeah. Right? In your cube, sometimes you just have to look at these cards and say, are they ultimately, even though they're a mechanic that I enjoy, are they ultimately just a little bit filler? Sure, look, I hate as much as the next person opening Brain Freeze and Underworld Breach and or Lion's Eye Diamond in the same pack. It's so devastating. And how wonderful it would be to have that Cogwork Librarian and to be able to take both of them. But if the archetypes aren't so dependent on that in this cube, then again, it's just kind of feels like it's more for the fun side of things. And yeah, your cube is getting very optimized now, right? You're having to be very, very choosy on these choices. And maybe it's just time for it to go. And
then the secondary component that I'll add is Cogwork Librarian is a construct. Deal Broker is a construct. Agent of Acquisitions, which the art could kind of fit because it looks like a knight, a construct. So I know you're loose on the top-down design aspects, and I do realize that in the world of the Fae and magic-driven stuff that they could have robots and machines. I'm not taking away from their tech that they've developed, but simultaneously, it just feels contextually out of place from the theme, because once the draft is done, Cogwork Librarian's art is interesting, but it's a 4/4/3 for vanilla now once it's come on the field. It's
they're in a library.
It's burnt itself sort of kind of though after that.
Yeah, they're in a library.
They're in a library.
I more saw them as kind of like the external pieces holding these stories rather than,
Yeah, I mean, I can see
the included portion of them. I more saw them as like an exclusionary factor to it, like kind of a meta take, like why I have Fact or Fiction in here as an example. But I do want to make a soft note on Leovold's Operative. It was a card that I was experimenting with because it's essentially just Cogwork Librarian, but you can only do it once. And I really considered on that card for a while just because it's an elf, it's a rogue, that's 2 subtypes I care about.
Yes.
Like that feels like you aren't with just a dead card there. It at least is subtypes you will care about at some point.
Yes, you got me on board with that one.
At the end of the day, it was still just a vanilla 3/2 when I could have a better 3-drop there. So
I'm kind of jumping ahead of my thoughts. So recently when I was talking about adding Nuka-Cola machine to the Monopoly, I need to clip in your response, but I'm not gonna. But it was, where on a Monopoly board do you see a Coca-Cola vending machine? That's kind of what I thought about today when I was processing this, is where in the Fey world do you see these creatures, like the constructs, right? So I had to kind of like try to put myself in the head of the curator and think about it. But ultimately, I want to invest my mental revenue into the play experience, not into the draft experience. That's my personal take on it. I don't want to be. And I can see Stu's point where you've got two key components and you want to pull together this advanced synergy that you must use that in order to complete that. That circuit makes sense to me too, but I don't see that quite so often in the Fey Cube, with the exceptions when you're trying to assemble the party and whatnot. I know there's some advanced synergies. I can see this more in
I think there's enough support for those archetypes that, necessarily have to draft 2 cards is probably not going to be as critical in this cube as it is in other cubes. But for me, it was more about the fun. And when I did draft this cube and I had that opportunity, I would take that card. I don't want to say super high. Obviously, I'm going to draft synergy before I draft something like that. But if I am really on the fence as far as a draft pick is concerned, and then I see that card and I have the option to sort of save one, I still think it's a very strong pick in a cube like this, but I definitely get it from an equity perspective that you're just trying to streamline the cube as much as possible. Let's move on. Artifact changes. Short and sweet, just like you are. There's been some really, really cool changes here. I'm going to talk about the first one. Stoneforge Masterwork, 1 colorless mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it. Screams aggro, screams pushing players to draft a type, right? A type across the board. Is this why you put in cards like this in, right? Did you put this in because you started looking at maybe pushing players towards going down a very, very specific typal route? Or was it just a value pick?
Both. So I actually got a lot of feedback that they were trying to go harder into some of the subtypes and then kind of wanted to feel more rewarded for doing it. And because one of the key aspects when I was designing the Fey Cube is that I wanted to make sure that all the typal payoffs are overlapping or at least self-contained to a degree. So, for example, I really like Imperious Perfect because it buffs elves, but it also creates the thing that it supports. It makes more elves. So at the end of the day, that card works on its own. People are not going to feel bad drafting this card, but if they end up in an elf deck, then they're going to feel even better. And when I was getting feedback of that they really wanted just more of that subtype payoff, my first thought was I want to Stoneforge Masterwork in because we're looking for that big dumb damage to help close the game that rewards you for being in the same subtype.
So I can actually see this. I was pretty impressed with this. Plus, going back to my original argument that I made about like constructs, this is like a suit of armor. This is very Fey oriented to me, and then plays into what you're trying to do from a typal standpoint. I was even staring at this card from my horror cube thinking, could I fit this in after looking at this? I'm like, oh, I didn't know this card's great.
I am taking this card very, very highly. It's cheap to cast. It's cheap to equip. Any kind of lasting effect that you can just move around from one creature to another, right? Attack with a creature that may be a 2/2 on the card that now becomes a 4/4 or a 5/5, and then move it over to another creature, and now I have a big blocker. That to me just screams value and screams strength. I love, love, love equipment cards like this that are just give you that kind of value.
And this gives relevancy to like your goblins and your elves, which if you didn't have a lord to press them or an anthem to press them, this is a built-in anthem. It makes it kind of Tron Goblin. I like it a lot.
The thing that was difficult with it was just the fact that there hasn't been a reprint of it. We really need to get more reprints of it. I think we will at some point. Like, I can't see us going particularly a long time without it. But right now it's sitting at like $2.50 as of recording. And I am willing to trudge the line of like $2.50 and be like, okay, this is a fine amount. It's not like an irrelevant cost just because the budgetary constraints is a very real thing for the Fey Cube. So that was one of the main things that was keeping it out of the Fey Cube.
So your post-CubeCon changes, reflecting on your artifacts, I noticed that you really did lean into increasing those typal synergies. You wanted that to be more of a thing. And this is going to be one of your curveballs as I project into this, but I'm going to read this card to you. You added this card, Adaptive Automation. For 3 colorless, you get an artifact creature construct. It's a 2/2. As Adaptive Automation enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Adaptive Automation is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Now, this leans back to my top-down design argument that I made with the Nuka-Cola comment that I kind of threw your way, where I didn't feel this was very Fey. This art in particular is very Mirrodin besieged, very Kaladeshian art kind of thing, whereas the Cogworks were kind of cutesy librarians. I felt like this one didn't really fit, even though it has a reason for being this cube. Its typo matters. It does the thing. I even looked at this for the artifact cube at one point, and I looked at this both for my horror cube as well. Ultimately, I decided it just wasn't from a thematic design perspective, and that's how I look at your cube, is from that very top-down Fey type of idea. So my suggestion, before we move into the curveball portion of this, is I was going to, I never give you a problem without a solution. I had a card that I looked at that I thought would be a good fit in here, is Icon of Ancestry opposed to the automation. For 3 colorless, get an artifact. As Icon of Ancestry enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creature control of the chosen type, get +1/+1. Then you can pay 3, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card of the chosen type from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order.
That is a strong card.
It's a good card. It's dynamic.
Very strong card.
And it's 40 cents. Okay, May, what do you think of my tilt towards not the robot versus something that still does the thing? Not trying to persuade, just suggesting.
So, no, I agree that thematically, Adaptive Automaton is not a perfect fit. It's more of that case that we've talked about, is be willing to make exceptions if it improves the gameplay of the cube. And I feel like that was an inclusion that I made because it's a creature. It's basically colorless Benalish Marshal, but only for a specific type. And those are things that we care about in the Fey Cube. And when it came to Iconic Accessory, it was a card that I considered, but I also considered that it might be too strong. But I'd be willing to make the swap. I think that it is definitely a better fit.
I mean, both of those cards that we talked about already really, again, incentivizes the players to just head down a very specific typal route, right? You're now getting these benefits for just drafting one type. And I'll go on to the next one, and maybe this is kind of along the same line. So this is Mirrors of the Forebears. This is a 2-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and you can pay 1 until end of the turn. Mirror of the Forebears becomes a copy of target creature you control of the chosen type, except it's an artifact in addition to its other type. So now you've got all this synergy with, like, I'm just going to draft fairies, or I'm just going to draft, whatever. And you're giving the players these colorless, super easy, not even splashable, right? Just stick them in. There's no color requirements as far as the types are concerned. Like that, those seem to, I don't know if that's a subconscious decision that you made when you were refining it, but that maybe that was...
Oh, it was very conscious. I really needed
just
ways to fill those slots. And it was really important in terms of the feedback that I got to make sure that people feel like that they have options when they're drafting, but also feel rewarded for being in that subtype.
How much of a concern do you have that these cards just become too pick one, pack oneable, if you will? Like, I can take this card and it doesn't really matter if I go down another route as far as the typal is concerned. Maybe I can just get so much value from these individual cards, and it doesn't necessarily have to be these cards. But do you have that consideration? I'll put this question to both of you, but how much does that sort of play into, especially with colorless cards, right, that are just super easy to drop into whatever you're putting together? And I'm going to draft a deck, and it doesn't really matter what type I'm drafting. I'm just going to drop this colorless card in because the value is off the charts. Does it seem like there's a little bit of agency that's taken away from the draft and the players a little bit? And how do you address that?
That was my main concern with Icon of Ancestry, was that while Adaptive Automaton is a creature, which makes it just a lot more frail, it makes it a lot more accessible for your party decks, it makes it do other things outside of just be a lot of value and a power on a card. Icon of Ancestry represents a lot of value. Like, I believe Icon of Ancestry is like pack one, pick one levels of good. Like, you see this come up in a pack, and you're like, all right, it doesn't matter what single subtype I'm going for, I can now just dig my heels in and pick that subtype. Versus Adaptive Automaton, I don't think that that's a pack one, pick one. It's good, it helps fill out what you're trying to do, but it's not so good that it's like pushing out whatever somebody else wants to draft.
No, you definitely want to get in your lane first, right? You want to draft the bonds in the lane that you're in before you pick up something like that. And I will say the Icon of Ancestry, I like that very, very much. I think it's a strong card in Commander.
Yeah, I can see that, but I like the
mostly I'm going to pick up like 10 copies.
Well, I like that search feature. When I was looking at that card, I was thinking about it mostly from the fairies that do very dynamic things. They're very flashy. They're very interacting with the battlefield rapidly. That's what I like about them. And I thought that card played into it kind of like, it was a lot like an impulse type of effect. And I leaned into that more. And I was thinking as a drafter, I would enjoy that. Yeah, a little bit more depth, I guess, is what I'm saying. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But again, I invest my resources on the actual play style of the deck building, not going back to the Draft Matters cards where I kind of didn't really want to invest my mental tasking there. When I'm on the field, I want to do complex things. And I just thought it added an air of complexity that I thought the cube would like. Let's kind of move over, for the essence of time, let's move over to your white section. And I want to grab onto another card where you're leaning into this typo matters, because I'm really digging this card. This is one that I actually put in my horror cube and then took out after CubeCon. It's a lot better in here. We'll just say that. It was Conjurer's Mantle for 1 colorless and 1 plains. You get an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. Whenever a equipped creature attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a card that shares a creature type with that creature from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Equip 1. That's Icon of Ancestry almost.
Listen, let's just start talking about the cost, right? 2 to play, 1 to equip for a +1/+1 and vigilance. Mm-hmm. By itself,
it's good.
Even if it didn't have the secondary ability, is a very, very nice little bump to a creature stats. But that secondary ability of being able to not just look at the top 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It's 6 cards. 6. That is a huge dig, right? I don't know how big this shovel is. It's not a mantle, right? It's the biggest shovel. It's a snow shovel to dig into your deck and find creature cards. But that is
snowplow going through your deck.
It is, exactly. I love that.
I want to go back to the icon. That was 3 and tap to look at the top 3 cards of your library. This is look at 6 to do the same effect. I am not seeing the differential here. It's only 1 pip. I think that particular mantle is more of a pack 1 pick 1 than the icon.
I would pick 1 pack 1 that card. 100% I would pick 1 pack 1. Knowing that the cube has that typal focus, a card like that just allows me to constantly dig and just get value. I love cards like that.
What do you think about it?
It's good. And no, I agree that in terms of power level, in an ideal situation, that Icon of Ancestry is a little better. However, I will push back a little bit of saying 1 pip of white is still a requirement. Saying that you have to be in white in order to play this card.
Yeah.
As opposed to Icon, where it's just kind of, no matter what you're playing, is so long as you're going for subtypes, then that can go in your deck.
Yeah, and I know the fixing is, you're not just dumping fixing into this cube to the point where people can just play 5 color decks on a whim, right? There is only enough fixing where you either have to make very, very strategic. Absolutely, I've tried in this cube to play. I think the last time I drafted it, I played a 2-color deck, and even that had its challenges. 3-color decks are going to be quite challenging. 4 and 5-color decks, I mean, unless you're just very, very aggressively drafting all of the fixing, then that's going to be a challenge. But even like you say, like if the rest of your deck is not white, drafting this 1 white pip card can present quite a challenge. I want to talk about this next one, and I'm only going to say 1 line. How many non-fox creatures do you have in this cube, May?
And what do they say?
So, the problem is I don't remember how many changelings I have offhand.
I was going to say, ignoring the changelings, right? Because that's kind of cheaty.
Or werefox bodyguard is what we're referring to. For
the changelings is important. The reason that I will note that non-fox does matter is because it prevents that card from being able to do 3-card combo with champion as a mechanic. Because essentially, how it would work is that you would have a creature come in that can exile something. It doesn't matter. So usually the fox. Then you champion it with one of the changelings that exiles it. Then you champion that thing championing that, which causes that to come back into play, exiling the initial champion, which brings the other champion in to exile the initial thing that you brought back in. The point is that you get infinite ETBs and whatever else that you're doing with those. So if you have literally any other payoff to make those 3 work, then you can end up with like infinite life. And that is a thing that can still exist in this cube, but having it be non-fox is relevant. The fact that it cannot hit changelings is big.
So anybody that's listening and they're wondering what in the heck are we talking about, we're referring to Werefox Bodyguard from 1 colorless and 2 planes. You get a creature Elf Fox Knight. It is a 2/2. It has flash. Whenever Werefox Bodyguard enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 other target non-fox creature until Werefox Bodyguard leaves the battlefield. Then you can pay 1 colorless and 1 plane, sacrifice Werefox Bodyguard. You gain 2 life. I like this card. I like the dynamics of this card. I think it's really great. It's awesome. I don't have much to add beside that. It just does a lot of things that I want to do in those colors.
There is one other actual fox card that is not
one other
a
fox?
changeling.
Nice.
One other, and it's another werefox.
In blue is what I want to talk about. Our good friend Justin Parnell and I had a grudge match. We went to the bottom of the Fey Cube. We've both lost. He's telling me we're playing together. It's one of the few matches I actually did at CubeCon 2023 because I was being the social butterfly that I am. I'm moving around the room, whatever. I'm going to sit down and I'm playing against Parnell. He's sitting over to my left. He's like, you just want to lose so you can play against me. I'm like, no, man, I'm going to try to beat this guy. He's like, you're not going to beat that guy. I'm like, all right, yeah, you're right. So I ended up playing Justin Parnell, and I'm on the play. I get my land down. He gets his tap land down, and then I play another blue source, and then I boomerang and bounce his tap land back. I think that was the demise of boomerang after I talked about that. Is that correct, May? The Justin Parnell incident is what we'll refer to it, the JP incident. It was fantastic. I still lost that match, but it makes you feel better.
Yeah, so one of the things that was important to note with Boomerang is that I really like the cute interaction of bouncing back somebody's tap land. I just find that hilarious. But at the end of the day, when it was gain lands, it wasn't as backbreaking as it was now, because now that we switched to just the tapped dual types, that bouncing back their tap land makes them feel, significantly slowed down. Yes, and that was not really a play experience that needed to be in here. As much as I love the art on Boomerang, it just did not need to be here, and that's okay.
If it matters, it brought me joy.
I will note that I do have 24 cards that I've marked as changeling from the previous topic. So
yeah, so that was your 1 blue change in part 1 of your TLDR. We're going to let's go talk about 1 card that you've now done in your black section that I think is pretty great. Do you want to present this one to her?
So
please?
This one is Una's Blackguard, 1 colorless, 1 black for a 1/1 fairy rogue with flying. Each other rogue creature you control comes into play with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. And Anthony's played Magic with me for a long time. He knows how much I enjoy making players discard cards.
Yes.
So these kind of cards immediately speak to me. Super fun.
I like this card. You cut this card?
I did have to cut this card. So I like hand control. I like hand control as an archetype and as a method to interact with your opponents. I think that it is a good thing to have. But the problem with Una's Blackguard in particular is that if it's stuck and your opponent could not remove it, then it could put your opponent in such a far behind position that they could not get back from. Because the problem is that all it takes is a couple rogues or a couple things with +1/+1 counters to just bop, and now you have lost enough cards that you can't interact with things anymore. And it's backbreaking against certain things. The fact that it retained its position there and added extra damage and extra hand control at no additional cost was an issue. So I ended up having to cut it, and then I've replaced it with the new card Ego Drain, which is just a 1 black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand, choose an online card, discard the card. If you don't control a fairy, exile a card from your hand. Basically, it's a way to say, hey, you're still playing fairies or you have changelings or whatever. This is now basically a Thoughtseize if you have one of those.
Interesting with Una's Blackguard that it doesn't say this ability only triggers once per turn.
You could empty somebody's hands before they even got a chance to get interaction.
I would hate that, Anthony.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this card killed
would
me
hate
too.
to just completely empty your hand with my 1/1 flyer and, just...
Because you don't run like a reanimator package in the Fake Cube, so once they're gone, they're kind of gone most of the time. That's what I observed.
Most of the time. Like, there are reanimation packages that exist. We certainly have a good amount of, like, Strands of Night decks that pop up. Then we have Ever After and Thorthograve that pop up. But for the most part, a lot of that reanimating things are happening later in the game. You're not going to be seeing, like, dump Gristlebrand, reanimate. That's not this cube.
Gristlebrand's not a fairy. Gristlebrand can't be in this cube.
No, Gristlebrand is not a fairy.
Let's talk about the one thing that fairies hate the most in the red section, Stu.
Do you think they hate this the most?
I don't think they'd like it much.
I don't think anybody likes it that much. As iconic as it might be, this is Fireball. X and a red. Fireball is X damage total, divided evenly, rounded down, among any number of targets. Pay 1 extra mana for each target beyond the first.
I think it's great. I love this edition.
I'm a big fan of Fireball. I think that it is a cool card. It's a flexible card. It's going to feel good at a lot of points in the game. And there were actually 2 cards that I was trying to replace that it fills the roles of. Breath of Darrigas was a big board wipe for a while where essentially you'd pay 2, then the kicker of 2, and then it would deal 4 to each creature without flying and each player. And I really loved Breath of Darrigas, but the problem is that if you were the flying deck, then you would have such an overwhelming advantage over your opponent that it was very difficult for them to get back in, and that extra 4 damage was very, very relevant. So the other card was Magic Missile, where it's just 3 mana, can't be countered, deal 3 damage divided as you choose. And I do feel like that Fireball is just kind of the best of both worlds in this category, where you can just dump a bunch of mana, clear your opponent's board, and then be able to get through. Or you can use it to just nuke somebody's life points, or you can do a bunch of miscellaneous other things with it. You get all that flexibility that I'm looking for, plus that way to clear the board that I was looking for. It just fills a lot more roles, and it's a simple inclusion I like.
Yeah, so. I might not be flexible, but I do like cards that are. And this card, for me, just fills a wonderful, I don't want to say gap necessarily, but just having that option, certainly as a red player, to be able to, again, clear that board, dump whatever your mana might be to finish off your opponent, or even just put a pressure on them to, like, hey, you can't just try and alpha strike me because I might just have 1 creature or 2 creatures back that are going to swing for lethal. And I think that flexibility is really what makes cards like Fireball so powerful.
And I think that card is one that'll kind of break. Sometimes you get those stalemates with the Fey Cube with certain archetypes, like typal synergies where the armies are trying to bleed through. This leans into, like, goblins now have a way to end games once they've kind of petered out. So I'm a huge fan. I think this is going to be great. It just clears the path that you need to clear.
Agreed.
So, and I think it's fair. I think we need some testing, but I think it's fair.
I think it's a perfectly fair card in this environment. There is one last thing that I wanted to mention, and that's the Wolves package. We've talked about the Wolves package extensively in a lot of episodes, and it is something that I've been back and forth on. It's something that I've been trying to push on, and ultimately, we came down to the conclusion that the wolf density is just not where it needs to be, and that was one of the subtypes that really struggled at CubeCon, where, sure, when the few good wolf cards were good, they felt great. But at the end of the day, wolves felt secondary to elves. So what I did to change the wolf package in order to make it feel good was that I made the wolves very clearly secondary to the elves. You want to be building that elf deck, and that elf deck happens to make wolves. So I ended up cutting, like, Pack Guardian as just the generic wolf filler card, or the Night Pack that makes a bunch of wolves, Howling Moon, which gives usually your changelings +2/+2, or whenever your opponent casts a second spell, it makes wolves. So a lot of those generic open good wolf cards just aren't really a thing anymore, and the couple wolves that still exist either exist because of elves or exist because the food packages.
Well, let's just touch on one of those additions real quick. So
Sure.
I'd like to highlight one. This is definitely a big upgrade for the Wolves deck, and this is Wolf Rider's Saddle. 3 colorless and a green. Artifact equipment. When it ETBs, you get a 2/2 green wolf creature. Then attach Wolf Rider's Saddle to it. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and can't be blocked by more than one creature. So you're getting a 3/3 for 4 that can't be blocked. That's a pretty aggressive card. So if you're saying that wolves can't be matched, like they can't go up against the elves, what are the roles, right? What are and we can just be very specific as far as the wolves. Each creature type is going to be specific to a certain role, right? Or a specific playstyle. What kind of role within the cube do wolves have right now?
So the role that wolves have at the moment is that they lean very heavily on usually Selesnya, so that way they're trying to take advantage of those token go wide things. Or what's been happening is part of the Golgari food package and being able to pull out a bunch of token payoffs from getting those wolves that happen to make food, or things like Wolf Rider's Saddle that happens to make wolves. So treating wolves more as a bonus to the things that people are actually playing was more important than me trying to throw in the occasional one-off wolf cards. So, that being said, I still have cards like Wolfear Avenger just because it's another wolf warrior. Silverfur Partisan was another one just because it's another wolf warrior. But at the end of the day, either they are good enough at what they're doing as part of the warrior packages, or in the case of Silverfur Partisan, where it's just, all right, if this thing gets targeted, I get another wolf. It replaces itself no matter what. And it feels really good being able to move on from just having to shove wolves in the same green slots as elves.
So we have a challenge on the cut of the Howl of the Night Pack. That seems like a real finisher for me. For 6 colors and 1 green, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token into play for each forest you control.
How many do you think you need to get out of this before it become, like, what's the cutoff for it to be a low value to being high value? Like, for me, I think if you've got 3 forests and you get 3 2/2s, that's not bad value. If you've got 4, now we're really extending to good value. 5 or more, and you've got, 10 power and toughness. That to me seems like a huge game swing. Like, what was the logic behind cutting this? Was it just not enough for wolves? Was it just I wanted to put another card that was more fun? Like, I would like to know what the logic behind was for cutting that.
Sure. So the issue is that it's 7 mana. It is definitely expensive. And it's not to say that I don't have other expensive cards in the cube or the format isn't slow. It is definitely slow enough that this could be cast. However, the problem is that a majority of decks end up in 2 color, maybe sometimes 3 color. And when you have Howl of the Night Pack, you are very adamantly in mono green as kind of a color and using that as a finisher. And if it resolves, then great. You have your game swing. If it doesn't, then you just kind of time walked yourself in terms of mana. My reasoning to remove it is that it's just too expensive for not enough of oomph to make wolf deck, if that makes sense. It feels like a standalone thing that makes wolves to close games rather than part of the wolf deck. And wolves kind of were in a spot that they just don't really exist outside of being secondary to the other things. And when you look at a card like this is just kind of its own thing. It doesn't add to what you're currently doing. It's just kind of, I have a bunch of forests, now I have a bunch of wolves.
Do you feel like there's a bit of a psychology that you're attempting to avoid cards? Like, if it doesn't fit a real strategy, right? As far as, like, wolves aren't a huge thing, right? They're almost more of, I don't want to say an afterthought, but they're not a primary focus in the cube. Was it that maybe combined with the fact that this is just a little bit too much good stuff and not enough value as a good stuff card, and therefore I want to cut it, and the focus is more on this is something that very much has an identity within the archetypes that I want to present in this cube, rather than just something that, hey, if you're in green and you've got a bunch of forests, you can just throw this in as a top end and it's probably going to win the game if you resolve it.
Exactly. And when it comes to the Fake Cube, having enough things at top end is not really a consideration that I'm having when we already have so many high CMC cost creatures that can come in and create pressure. Like Anthus Dragon in red is huge impact to this format. And having a Volcanic Dragon that also can just divide 4 damage earlier in the game to clear out a bunch of things is really good. As opposed to Howl of the Night pack, where people will just kind of pass it around, and unless they're very avidly in that lane of, I now have a bunch of forest, I'm now playing this to make a bunch of wolves, now I can close the game, it just did not, statistically speaking, come up as often as I wanted it to.
Yeah, so I really like the changes that you've done to the Fake Cube. I think it's pretty great. It's interesting how you've taken the feedback that you've received from players at CubeCon, you've ruminated, you sat on it, you decided, and you strengthened some packages. And I want to reiterate that feedback, while you have to, as a curator, look at it from a point of view of it wasn't the perfect cube the first time, it's always good for new curators to hear this because this cube has existed for quite some time, right? And it keeps getting better and better. And the more you open it up to that larger arena of players that you're going to get outside of your play group, your comfort zone, that they're going to give you some feedback like, I think this card could be better, or like we talked about when we talked about Icon of Ancestry. It's different points of view that'll help you look at the, I guess, from a multi-dimensional perspective of your cube, because sometimes when we're looking at our cubes, we look at it as the curator standpoint. We try to get into the minds of the drafters, but sometimes simply it's better to hear the opinions of the drafters. Would you agree?
I would agree. Because I like you to listen to my opinion.
Yeah, we talked about it. It matters to me.
You can tell me how much I'm
For context, I've been working on the Fake Cube for the past 4 years. It took a long time to get it to the point where I have a good understanding of what people are drafting, what people are trying to play, what people are looking for in this cube, and actually having information from both my play groups and CubeCon to actually back that up feels like a privilege as a cube curator. And when you're starting out, is that it takes time to build up to that point, because that's essentially your kind of art project. It's your pet project. You're trying to curate the environment that you're trying to play and that you're wanting to encourage your group to play. And it takes time. My Fake Cube only got to where it was because I've been working on it for 4 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. They really are labors of love, right? It's just, it's such a long-term project, not something that you're just going to, unless you're incredibly fortunate or talented, which I can't speak to, it's not going to be an overnight process.
Yeah, I was going to say, the ultimate
so
takeaway, really taking that time. I've done 8-10 years. She's done 4 years.
Yeah.
The takeaway for a new curator listening to this, wanting to get into this and do this, is you can see how long it took to polish and to curate these cubes to get them where they're at, right?
Well, let's first of all say, right, if you really want to get a really great idea of cube and drafting cube, we've got a great, a phenomenal idea for everyone, especially if you're in the East Coast and in North Carolina most particularly. There's an event that you could be attending in April, on April 27th. Tell us about it, Anthony. Something's happening.
Something's happening. So on April 27th at the Gathering Place in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, we're going to have the UberCube event, which they have now coined the UberCubeathon, which I thought was great, and it gave me a lull. So they put it on their Facebook, right? And it's 64 players, 8 cubes. Top 8 will be playing my Power Cube. We've got a local kind of cube that we're doing called the Fun Cube that I'm excited to play and try that out for the first time. And then we have 7 of the curated cubes in the main event, going to mine being the 9th. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to just have a good time. Libations, drinks,
prizes,
sit around, prizes.
Karaoke.
The prizes are amazing. If you're interested in learning about the prize support, I have learned this. I have taught myself in my own ways. Please reach out to me. I'll be glad to share the prize support. The store is being exceptionally generous, and they've got a couple of raffles that are going to be firing off. They said a Crimson Vow. They're going to be doing New Capenna, and then they told me not to tell anybody because it's secret. I'm like, You can't be that secret, right? I mean, I'm sorry in advance, the Gathering Place, but they're talking about doing like a secret raffle for a mystery booster as well, too.
Ooh.
So they're getting pretty serious about this. So it's
probably not going to be like an alpha booster or something, but something pretty fun.
No. But they definitely take care of the players. We actually interacted with them, and we're going to work with them again at the Extra Life event in July in Durham. And it was really great because we saw how well they treated the people that showed up for that event. They helped sponsor. So,
and again, that is April 27th, North Carolina at the Gathering Place. That is thegatheringplacegames.com. You can check out the show notes in our recent shows, or just hit us up on the Discord or on Twitter. We got links to the event. It's going to be super fun. We also want to give a shout out to the Cali Cube Champs. This is June 1st and June 2nd in Santa Rosa, California. And this is the one where the top 8 get to play Aqua's Cube, and the prize there's a free ticket for CubeCon.
Yeah.
Up on I mean, that by itself has got to be a good enough reason to want to go there and show up. That and obviously playing.
And Joe Anderson's so passionate about Cube. Yeah. He's just really like the best person in the world. He's already pulled this off once before. It was fantastic.
Yep.
And then let's talk about where we talked about this. May wasn't here last time. We said our
very own May.
Our very own May is part of the CubeCon staff, part of the communications team. CubeCon will be October the 17th to the 20th for the best Magic outside of UberCubeathon. Calling it that now, right? 2024.
That's brave.
It's pretty brave. It's pretty brave. It's pretty brave. Just saying.
Very bold statement.
May's coming to both.
Professionally, I will have to disagree.
That's right. So let's give.
I have standards I must uphold. Damn it.
So let's give a shout out to our patrons, to Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nick LaPointe, Stephen Conafall, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Again, a huge shout out. So much love to you guys for all the ongoing support for the podcast.
And I'm excited to say that Nick's coming out. We also got Cube Heads, Steve coming out the UberCubeathon. I gotta get used to this, right? Stephen Conafall's coming out, and we have some others that I'm negotiating with. It's gonna be a good time. But most importantly, we have May.
They can they can all slow down a little bit. Like, I'm not playing, but I still don't want to get beat.
It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
If you would love the show, go and give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. We will thank you for it. Really does go a long way in putting the show out there to all the Magic players, right? Get people involved in Cube. And if you want to support the show, you can also use our Ultasleeve affiliate link at ultasleeves.com/UberCube. Go and get 5% off of your purchase. If you want to support the show, you can also use our Inked Gaming affiliate link. Go check them out. Placemats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kinds of custom products for your Magic experience.
And we've also, I'm an admin or co-admin for the MTG Facebook drafting page, which has gotten huge. We're almost encroaching 900 members now.
Facebook.com.
And so people come in there, they ask questions, pack one, pick ones.
That's
what is
right.
Cube? What do you think of my Cube?
It's getting pretty
very
popular.
Friendly. It's safe. I help try to make sure I mitigate all that risk for you. It's a good platform. So I'm really digging it.
Well, good for you. That's really
I'm trying
awesome.
to keep
giving back.
Trying to keep the Cube world happy.
Anthony's giving back.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. And you can also find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. May, where can they find you besides on UberCube?
You can find me at Twitter as well at Magic1 sub.
At Magic1.
At Magic1.
It's a great follow.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
It's a great follow.
Check out this fake Cube. The fake Cube's sick. We'll share that in the links.
And you can also find us, reach out to us via email. I don't know if that seems to be a little quiet recently, but if you guys have got questions about the podcast or about Cube in general, hit us up, UberCubeMTGPodcast at gmail.com, or hit us up on the Discord, man. Again, lots of cool stuff going on the Discord. Again, the Deck Boast, best channel.
Hit me up on YouTube. Leave me those reviews. I love them reviews. It makes my Fridays great. We got some YouTubes. We've found the internet.
Ooh.
Literally, I'm uploading all of our videos. New platform. We need to figure out some cool stuff we can do, drafts and all that. We have plans. There's stuff in the oven. We're going to figure it out.
Stuff in the oven.
Stuff in the oven. I don't know what that means, but we're going to work it out.
All right, very cool.
And we have a Patreon. So if you want to support the show, you can find us at Patreon/UberCube. It's just really great. I appreciate all our Patreons we talked about. They're supporting the show. I mean, we joked about it. Stu's mic is falling apart.
It is.
It still is.
My mic stand has got so many
I got him a
dents in it.
backup.
I'm losing screws out of it now, so
Is it
it might have to be replaced pretty
mechanically
soon.
dilapidating. But other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is Happy
Cubing.
Fake Cube!